welcome to First Geek 411's latest book club, wherein I will prove that spooky season is a state of mind. Tonight we will be discussing Your Blood, My Bones by Kelly Andrew.
Yes, I do have sticky notes.
I mean, that's probably much better than my plan of just hoping I remember. So,
I showed off the sticky notes because I don't normally take notes.
All right, before we jump into it, you can find us at all of the places. We are First Geek 411 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can come chat with us on our Discord server or shoot us an email at 1stgeek411@gmail.com. Watch live on our Twitch every Monday night at 6:45 Mountain Time and find all our videos over on YouTube. And you can also check out our Redbubble store for some sweet, sweet merch. I'm Shanine, and with me I have Emma
Hi.
and Cameron.
hello, hello.
All right, so in Your Blood, My Bones, Wyatt, James, and Peter spent childhood summers in the country together until Wyatt and her mother left her father and the Westlock farmhouse. But now Wyatt's father has died, and the family house has been left to her, and she intends to burn it to the ground. Instead, she finds Peter chained up in the basement. Dark forces trap her on the property, demanding her blood, and she begins to unravel the dark history of her father's cult, her family's powers, Peter's immortality, the evil that all those things together are holding back, and the tangled threads of connection tying Wyatt, Peter, and James together. Dun dun dun.
I feel
Okay.
like until Wyatt and her mother left the farmhouse is like the biggest understatement of the summary, but
Yeah.
They left.
Kicking
it is
and screaming.
it's a factual statement, but yes.
Did they leave? Yes. Did they leave peacefully? Not really.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
To be fair, I finished this book like 3 weeks ago, and the details have descended into mere vibes for me. So the amount of details that I did remember was rather impressive
Mm-hmm.
for me. All right, let's have some 3-word reviews.
Bored and confused.
Not
That's
so
as
spooky.
3 words as I can get. Bored and confused. And not so spooky for Cameron.
Um, Immaculate vibes, sadness.
And there's an ellipsis there.
Yes.
Sadness.
Alrighty, let's start with some world building and setting. Um, I feel like it is quite notable when the setting of a story is very, very limited, and the for the most part, the story takes place um, in the house slash the surrounding property. Um, what is y'all's thoughts on the setting?
It reminded me
Or
a
something
lot of
related.
when we were watching New Mutants, which I know is not like the best bar to compare things to, because that I believe my review of that was it was indeed a film. Um, but like it kind of had that cool. I like with like spookier things do this. I think it's really cool to give like that isolation vibe of like we are lost. In this case, there's like literally things in the woods that we don't know what they are. Like, um, and I think it kind of adds to that like that atmosphere compared to like being in a city. And it kind of like leads to like a different kind of spooky slash ghost story.
I have a sticky note that is a parallel answer to this, in that this to me kind of felt like a sequel no one really wanted or asked for. And I say that because I feel like we were more just given the world building rather than shown the world building. So, like, a lot of the relationship with the three main characters was them musing about it as their friendship as kids, as adults. So they're like, oh, remember when we did this thing that one time as kids? Rather than, here's three kids doing something fun during the summer. So it's just like we're just like handed things instead of like getting to experience them with the characters. And which isn't necessarily wrong, but it was just like I don't want to be handed things. I want to experience the thing. Um and then I was just confused in general with like I don't know if it was the author's style or whatever for her writing, but I still don't fully understand what kind of world I'm supposed to be picturing in my head, if anything at all. So, from the vibes I was getting, it seemed pretty cool, but I still don't entirely know what the vibes are.
Well, I will say this is a sequel that I very much wanted and asked for. Um,
Wait, is it actually a sequel?
no, it's not.
Okay,
It
there you
is.
go. Because
It
if it was,
takes
I'd be like, okay, that changes a lot of my comments.
it takes place in the same universe as her first novel, and some of the later characters are little cameos from the first novel.
Okay.
And I
Because
believe,
one of
as
my
announced
comments is
today, third book is coming and will use some of the same characters. We got the actual title right,
not
if I'm
gonna
remembering
lie,
Shanine's story correctly.
I
Yes.
literally have a sticky note that says Mackenzie and Co. needed to be introduced earlier in order for the MacGuffin to work. So, like, the fact now that I know that some of the later characters are characters from her other book are like, okay, that I can understand. I understand why they weren't introduced earlier.
They have they have a whole book about them, and it
Great.
is also delightful. Um, yes, one thing that I forgot to mention off the top is Kelly Andrew is also a deaf author, and I love the representation in her novels. In her first novel, the main character is also deaf, and yeah, it's great. I love her.
That's fabulous.
Um, but yes, I think
Related question. Is Micah one of those people?
not that I remember.
Okay. Because
Don't
Mike
think.
is a character that is mentioned but never actually shows up on screen. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I read The Whispering Dark like immediately when it first came out, and yeah, I remember loving it and absolutely zero details about it at all whatsoever.
there you
But
go.
it was brilliant. Um, but yeah, I was super excited for Your Blood, My Bones, and I guess we don't get a lot of stories like this where a lot of it is told through reminiscing and things like that. But I think the story that is being told is not the story of them growing up together, it's the story of them losing each other and dealing with that.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I liked the setting, the kind of, she calls it cottage core horror,
Mm-hmm.
and like I'm there for those vibes, like Hobbit but a little spooky. Um,
Yeah.
It's all chill until the giant spider monster shows up. Like,
yeah,
You say that, but there's literally a piano rotting in the living room.
you know.
it wasn't rotting to begin with.
It's still rotting, though, Shanine. Pianos don't just do that.
There are reasons for that. It's fine.
Everything's fine. Nothing to see here.
Nothing.
um, but yes, also I think it being where they grew up, and it's like the most important location to all of them, really, for different reasons. Um, it makes sense that it all takes place there in the end. Um, and then, yeah, obviously, all of the evil, dark things are residing in the forest. I have no questions about that.
Mm-hmm. Again, I'm sure it's fine.
Fine. All right. What is everyone's thoughts on Peter, James, and Wyatt as characters and their relationship to each other?
My biggest gripe is with Wyatt. First of all, it is not mentioned until partway through the third part that she's 18. She's 18, question mark, question mark, question mark. She does not read like an 18-year-old. Period.
In what
I feel like
way?
that changes my entire perspective of the story. The fact that she's 18, she read in my brain like a 20-year-old. I don't know. That's something that sort of messes with me, as well as bigger picture. Um, she doesn't question things very much from the beginning. She's the only one who's in the dark, whereas James and Peter are not to any extent. She shows up, finds her childhood friend chained up in the basement, gets a call from the other best friend on a disconnected phone who's like, don't trust him. And she's just like, okay, I'm just chilling here and I can't leave and I only tried once to leave. I'm not gonna try again. Girl, try a little harder. Wyatt's the only one I have the biggest gripe with. Peter and James, great. Cool. Thought out characters. Wyatt could try a little harder and like actually maybe have a mild existential crisis about the people and family she grew up with, but she doesn't. So, that's my biggest gripe with the characters, and it's with Wyatt. And that's that. Um, I was voting a bit more on James' side. I was a bit Team James over Team Peter. If there are teams,
If there are teams,
if there are teams, I am Team James.
for which one wants to literally murder her, / the other one is the incarnation of the beast.
Yeah.
These are the teams.
I'm going with Team James. I mean, they both technically want to kill her.
That's
but
what like, I mean, potato.
I'm gonna go with Team James, you know, details. That's it.
For me, and we have a question in chat. There's a difference between 18 and 20-year-old reading, like how you would read them. So I'll say for me, that was more drastic because I very much agreed with you, Emma. But like I couldn't tell if she was supposed to be like 14, 15 or like 24, 25.
Yeah.
Like it was very unclear, like because it does talk early on about her like graduating or finishing school or something like that, but
I very much pictured her as a young adult, and then literally in the last quarter of the book, it was like, oh yeah, by the way, she's still literally a teenager.
Yeah.
So,
and and I think for me, part of that confusion it came from a lack of clarity of how old she was when they left the farm. Of like in my head, she was like 8 or 9, which
yeah.
clearly is not how the math adds up, and so that would kind of like led to my confusion. Um, but yeah, it does lead to this like this weird thing. Let alone the like 5 year time jump where seemingly nothing has happened to her, and everything has happened to Peter and James. Um, but yeah, I am. So I'll say for the trio, I really liked them. I think there's a fun like group dynamic between the three of them. You kind of have your like James as the smart one, Peter as like the sulken like um, tortured poet, um, and like literally tortured, but and
Nerd.
then you have Wyatt as kind of the like the one that's on their like it's her home turf basically. Like she's the one that kind of belongs and gets to like own being at the farm as a kid. And you kind of have that fun dynamic between the three of them. Um, I really this very much left me wanting to see this as like a mini series, like a cool like 6 episode where you actually have like this kind of goes to what y'all were talking about earlier, but instead of having them like reminiscing or having like Wyatt thinking through like experiences, like actually have flashbacks to them at the farm as a child. That way you can get these really cool like what's up with that weird guy in the robes in the back, and you can kind of like tease that mystery a lot more. Um, and um, I like Emma, I was also confused by Wyatt's lack of curiosity for all of that. I chalked it up to her mother being like overprotective. Well, I say over protecting her child from the literal cult that she's a part of. But like, uh, but yeah. And then I really liked that we got this. I liked the dynamic between Peter and James. Um, Again, this like James is one of the few people that knows how to like actually kill Peter, and that like how that led to Peter killing James, and yeah, I think that that was super cool. I'm also a sucker for immortality stories. See The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
Yeah.
I love this trio. Um, I don't know, Peter, obviously. I I love the the sad boys. Um, he's just a sad boy, and yeah, I don't know. I love him. Um, James is like British and witty. My other favorite things. Um,
Which also, I did not process that he was British until towards the end of the book, which is weird. But that's just a side note.
and Wyatt, I also liked. I feel like maybe it was more a not questioning things out of self preservation. Like things are too weird and we need to deal with like one thing at a time because all of this is just like freaking me out and it will break my brain. Um, yeah, just like uncovering years of childhood trauma, um, probably because as much as she was unaware of, I'm sure it did not all seem completely normal at all times growing up at that house. Um, and then having these super weird powers that she doesn't know how to control and that are scary.
Yeah. we also really did the Elsa, the like conceal don't feel. Like instead of figuring out how these powers work, we're gonna just not talk about them.
Yeah.
Like she really needed an Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters to like.
As the aforementioned Micah discovered, who is again a character who never actually shows up but is just mentioned, he apparently experienced the blunt end of conceal don't feel. From what I've gathered, he's still on ventilation or whatever.
I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah, I'm sure it's fine.
I'm curious about this to hear what y'all think on this. But one of the things I really liked about this trio also is everyone's voice felt distinct in the story. And like that's something that I know in like there's authors that I very much love, but it really feels like you could pass lines around to whoever. But for these, they all feel very distinct. What did y'all feel that way as well, or is that just me?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I do kind of wish that at the end, James got a chapter or two of his own. I understand why he didn't throughout, because he was literally the beast. But like at the end, when it was actually him, I would have liked to get a chapter that was his.
He did.
But other than that, I'm right with you.
Isn't like the second to last one, James?
Yeah. Isn't it? Is it?
Yeah.
I will say though.
There you go.
I think that's something too that like flashbacks could have done very well. Like, I think it would have been very fun to have a like as soon as we find out that James is the Beast, to have a James flashback chapter. And like get some of the background to how James ended up dead from his perspective. I think that would have been a cool way of doing that.
It's all Wyatt at the end.
Yeah, chapter 33 is James.
Oh, there we go. There we go. I was listening to the audiobook at the end, so I missed that part.
I have a quote that I think depicts their relationship interestingly. Peter had made a great many blunders in his numerous stunted lifetimes, but there were 3 mistakes that destroyed everything. The first was befriending Wyatt Westlock. That was weakness. He'd meant to keep her at arm's length. The second mistake was kissing her. That was jealousy. He hadn't wanted James to have something he didn't. The third mistake was telling James what it took to kill an immortal. That was desperation. I think that at least hints at how complicated the relationships between them are. Like they're not like just really good friends. There's a lot of like jealousy and complicated emotions, complicated situations that they are involved in due to no fault of their own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I agree. And I like that, again, this tortured poet of Peter, of like, man, like all he's needed is someone to like have his back. And he is just stuck in this awful place that he can't, like the only way to escape from is to kill this person that he accidentally becomes friends with. Like,
and in relationship, secondary clarification, because again, I was confused 99% of the time reading this book. Was it his dad who made the deal that made him immortal and not him? Okay.
Correct.
In which case, he's not even immortal because of his own choosing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which also sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
He
just
he got the rough
yeah.
end of both of those deals. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of almost killed in like lumberjack accident, and then fire like gathering firewood accident, and then ends up being like super tortured for the rest of his life. So
His very eternal life.
yeah, his very long life.
Yes. Of several hundred years.
All right. Speaking of deals with monsters, who is your favorite monster to
A
make
good
an
mimic.
appearance?
Not gonna lie. A good mimic in any form or format or version I like really well, especially when the mimic knows that the characters know it's a mimic. So, like, in a lot of cases in this book, Wyatt knows it's a mimic she's looking at, in part because she's been told, and in part because she's looking at a version of herself that should not exist. And the mimic knows that. The mimic knows that Wyatt knows. And is still playing into it and really doing its job well. I love a good mimic. It's great. Great for spooks. Mimics are great spooks.
Mm-hmm. So I referenced it earlier. I believe it's called The Widow.
Yep.
But the like, I love the there's always a bigger fish. And so like we've had this build up that like the beast is this awful like monster that is like in like trying to eat Peter's soul, and then like the widow shows up and it's like, oh please, like and so yeah, I love that. I love a good like almost like Cthulhu-esque monster of
Yeah.
like, oh, you think the beast is bad? Here are the actual things that lurk in the dark. And yeah, I thought that was super cool. I love the tie-in of it being something that Peter's interacted with before, and like that being like a part of his guilt is like leading people to the widow for her to kill them, like um and yeah, and so I really liked that moment in the story.
I really liked the Death Watch. I love a unique monster that I haven't heard of before. And the Death Watch appears in different forms to different people, um, showing you the moment where you are looking death in the eye. Um, and it feeds on your grief. And it's
End of time.
it's creepy and dark, and I like it.
Yeah.
I think that was maybe one of the most unsettling monster moments was
It
like creepy yourself.
it kind of had Weeping Angel vibes from Doctor Who,
Yeah.
of like the idea that like it shows you this thing, and then it feeds on what it makes you feel because it showed you that thing, in the same way like the Weeping Angels like send you back in time and then feed on that like the energy of what your life could have been. And yeah, I thought that was a really cool way, and it's a cool way too of like giving us as readers like foreshadowing that we can build to, which I also always enjoy in a bad guy.
Favorite side characters?
The goat! Mama the goat!
Yeah.
In connection to the photo you have in the notes, it's because she's got a singular brain cell and she's great comic relief. You gotta have a good goat.
Yeah.
I love Mama the goat so much. Best part. Every single time she shows up, she's just the goat. The goat's the goat.
Mm-hmm.
I like the goat.
Yeah. Um, I I'll second that and say I feel like my biggest complaint is that Mama the Goat is not a bigger part of this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I would love Mama the Goat like headbutting the beast or something like that. Like, that's really what I want. Is like again, um, she's just Mama the Goat's about one thing, and like, I would love for that one thing to have been also headbutting the beast. And so,
Also, can we give an honorable mention to all the names of the chickens? I don't
yeah.
even remember specifically what they were, but they were things like desperation
Yeah.
and Susan and depression or whatever. Like completely dumb names that aren't even names. And yet they're chickens with names that Peter so lovingly gave them.
Yeah, I I will add a vote to Mama the Goat, greatest of all time. Um, you gotta love her. Um, and also, as a fan of The Whispering Dark, it was super fun to see the infuriatingly sassy Colton again. What a guy. Um, but yes, as Emma mentioned, I have an image in here. Kelly Andrew did an AMA on Instagram, and someone asked, "Who's your favorite character?" And she said, "James Campbell and Mama the Goat are in the running for my favorites in Your Blood, My Bones. James, because he was so much fun to write in all forms, and Mama, because she possesses the singular brain cell." Right. Any standout moments?
Everything with the goat because that's what I understood the most.
uh, I do like when we get Wyatt trying to leave. Like, I do wish there was a little bit more of her like trying harder. Because I would have loved to have seen. We very much get the implication that like the property isn't letting her leave, and I would have loved to have seen like more
More of
of
that.
that. Like, whether it was implications of more monsters like scaring her back towards the property or Mama the Goat having to protect her from more things like um, I would have or even like her like taking turns and then winding up back
Her trying to use
like at
an
the
old
farmhouse.
bicycle that has a wheel fall off.
Yeah,
Like,
stuff like that. But I do really enjoy basically every time Peter tells her don't do this thing, and then she immediately does it and it doesn't go well,
yep,
but like let's go
yep.
Wyatt, like you live your life. um and so I
Don't
did
let a
really
man tell you what to
yeah
do.
so yeah, I enjoyed that. And then kind of with that I do like once she's finally off property. And while not necessarily like the longest portion of the book, I do like that we get to see her interact with some of these other people. And we get a little bit more of her backstory. We get some more implications about like what she's done with her magic and some of her grief that is associated with that. And so yeah, I really liked that side of it as well. And then again, the widow showing up and just wrecking things.
Yep.
Oh, my other
Go
that
ahead.
came to mind. Sorry. It's the whole thing was mentioned earlier. Like the whole scene with the piano rotting, it did really feel like a moment of Wyatt sort of processing and letting go of some of her anger. So, yeah.
Yeah. Um, to echo what Cameron said. The scene with the widow was so creepy and probably sticks in my mind more because big spider and scars me a little bit.
Mhm.
Just just some just some imaginary trauma from reading that. Um, and basically, any time that Peter and Wyatt are talking and are just being so flippin' cute that I can't handle it, I just did a lot of screaming while reading this book. All right. Any dislikes?
Yes. The biggest one that comes to mind, because I literally just finished this book like this morning. Joseph Campbell showing up at the end and going, "Haha, you fell into my trap and did everything I needed you to do so that I could steal Peter's power." And it's literally just like, this is the first time you are here in person, and every time the only reason I know who you are as as James' dad is because you've been mentioned in memories. So you just kind of show up and go, "Thanks, Wyatt, for helping me steal Peter's power, even though it's gonna fail." Because it's just like adding an extra element that didn't really need to be added into all of the chaos that was already happening. And, like, yes, he is the one who sent Wyatt there to begin with, but there was no, like, build up of the relationship between them, or, like, it felt very much like a member of the crew has betrayed us, without any of the relationship or friendship there. It was just like, oh, by the way, this guy did this thing who has only ever been heard from off screen. I am using all film terms because that's what I know. But like, it was just like, why are you don't need to be here? Like, you could still have the element that he, you know, sent James to do all of his dirty work for him without him actually being there to dig another rut in the road. If that makes any sense. That's like my biggest dislike is like, this guy doesn't need to be here. I'm already confused enough as it is. I'm just trying to understand everything. So, yeah,
Aforementioned, not enough Mom of the Goat.
obviously.
And then I'll, to a degree, echo Emma here. Of like, there were definitely parts of this book that like I wasn't sure if I was confused from like I just need to read the book better, or if like I was intentionally supposed to be confused. And so, like as an example, there are some times where the property, the house, start to decay, and like not necessarily understanding the scale of the property kind of makes it hard to care about that because it feels like, oh, we're boarding up the house trying to board out this thing that's coming for us. Then the house like starts to decay, but then like everything's kind of fine. And so like there's that degree of like from Wyatt's perspective, which is our perspective, she's our point of view character,
Mm-hmm.
of like, oh, are these things in her head, or is this something where because this is a farmhouse, it's like a giant place, there's other parts that they can go to and still be safe. Um, and so for that, some of the scale, I think, confused me. I feel like this is a book that could have benefited from a map in the book of the property.
Yeah.
Even though, like, from what we see of it, the property's pretty basic. But I don't know how you would do that without spoiling a lot of the major points, like the reveal that, hey, this is a murder cult. Like, you can't exactly be like, sacrificial altar. on the map that's before the book begins. But that was definitely something that I feel like could have helped.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'll I'll kind of echo what Emma said of Joseph showing up. I liked that, especially like the couple chapters before he showed up, he starts getting mentioned quite a bit in their references. So like that's a good way of seeding that like, hey, this character that we mentioned at the beginning is going to come back. So I felt that that was done very well. But as Emma was saying, it felt like it was supposed to be a surprise that like the person that we had very clearly established had tricked Wyatt to coming back and had essentially like was okay with his son being murdered. Like that he was the bad guy. And so I feel like that kind of missed like it felt like that was supposed to be an emotional moment and I don't feel like it was.
Yeah. And kind of like what you to add on what you said earlier, it was like there's a lot of moments like that where I was reading it going, I don't know why I should care about this. Because I don't. And yet it's being presented as though I should. And I don't. I want to care, but I don't. So that was one of those moments.
Right. I think I will address that in a later question with my thoughts on that. One dislike that I thought of a day or two ago that I don't know if it's just because the details have slipped out of my grasp or if this just was not mentioned, but like in the beginning, James is like calling and like, I'm coming, I'm on my way, I'm coming. And then James is there. And do we ever know how he got there? Or did he just appear?
That's one of those
And
things.
why didn't we question that?
See, interestingly enough, I hadn't picked up on that until now, and yet that's one of those things in my head that actually plays really well into him being the beast.
Mm-hmm.
Because whether or not that was actually mentioned, assume like if it was, and the fact that I'm like, oh, I hadn't even like processed that, then it's like that does play really one of those things that plays really well into him being the beast of like he says he's going to show up, he's coming, he's going to show up, and then he's just there. It's like, okay, we're not going to question it because he said he was coming. Like, especially in comparison to Wyatt talking to her mom on the phone, who says she's coming, and then Wyatt goes out to meet her mom, who ends up being a mimic or whatever. Like that. Don't be a mimic. Don't be a mimic. Like that's super interesting. That is just one of those things that seems like, man, that plays really well into the fact that he's not actually him.
Yes.
That's a good one. That gets a thumbs up.
Yep.
I mean, it does make it very obvious to us, the reader, that he's not who he says it is. But why are Peter and Wyatt are not like, oh, you must have come in a car. Let's leave in that car.
Yeah, I agree. That's one that like, again, like Wyatt's seeming lack of curiosity.
Yeah.
Kind of confused me there. And we get a scene earlier too where like Peter's like ripped the phone off the wall and it keeps ringing, or it rings later, and
yeah,
it's just fine. Like no worries here. It's just the magic phone. Like, and yeah, so there's a lot of things like that that I get from Wyatt's perspective of like her world has pretty much been turned upside down as she's finally like coming to understand what's been happening. But like At one point, James makes a comment about being jet lagged, but again, there's no like, oh yeah, of course. Wait, when did you get here? Like,
Yeah.
there's just no specifics. Which I think from a movie or like TV show perspective, like James appearing would fit in so well for that suspense and creepiness of like him being the Beast. Like he feels like that character in that way. Um,
There are no holes and no flaws, and the vibes are immaculate.
yeah.
And next question. I have a quote.
We love quotes.
We do love quotes. Okay. At one point, um, Peter says, "Someone once told me that there's a second life in dying things." Um, so throughout the novel, there are obviously a lot of themes of death and loss and grief. Um, what is your thoughts on that?
I mean, Wyatt's a walking example of that quote. Well, almost a walking example. Just in the sense that she can. All of her witchy powers are around fours and mushrooms and things. Which is super cool and just like, you know, feeds into that, if you will. I mean, really, this whole book is about loss and grief and loss because it's Peter dying over and over and over again, and who has multiple gravestones for every time he's experienced that. Um, and it's Wyatt coming to burn down her childhood home because of childhood trauma, who then realizes not everything is as it seems and ends up losing one of her closest friends. And it's James who's been forced to do something that he never really wanted to do against his friends. Or at least the people who end up being his friends. And for what I understood of the book, it seems like a pretty good exploration of that.
Yeah, I liked that a lot. I think it handled its themes well without making them too heavy. Of like, I feel like having the point of view character swaps between Wyatt and Peter help with that. It like that does make it a little easier since like everything for Peter is so awful. Of like, I definitely feel like I could not like handle him like a whole book with him as the main character. It would just be like way too much sad. But like having like Wyatt's side of it and her dealing with loss, but also, and this is one of the reasons like the age thing for Wyatt confused me because like it seemed like the idea like one of the themes was going to be like loss of innocence. Well, it is loss of innocence is one of the themes, but like that makes more sense if she's like a younger child. Just in terms of like her world being turned upside down, but at the same time, nah, just kidding. Arson, let's go. Like, um, and um, and so yeah, I thought that this was all handled well, and I love that I love the idea of the Peter Pan esque, like basically like the inverse of Peter Pan, where we get like the loss of childhood and like that loss for, I mean, I guess for mostly for Wyatt, but like that loss of she can no longer be a child. Like there's no more innocence as she moves into this next point of her life because of all the things that have happened to her. And yeah, so I thought those themes were handled well.
Yeah, I think it addresses like the many kinds of death and loss that we can go through, the loss of friendships, the loss of people in our lives, um, the loss of lives that we thought we would get to live. Um, and the way that we can experience those losses over and over. Um, but also that even in the midst of all of that death and loss and grief, that we are not without hope
Mm-hmm.
and that new things can be born out of it. All right. So there is quite a bit of imagery and things around faith and religion and things like that. What with the cult and the chapel and other religious imagery and things. What are your thoughts on all that in the novel?
So I really liked this one with this idea of like Peter basically being like the sacrificial lamb, like that he is the one that's being sent out to appease the beast. Uh, and ironically, in doing so, is actually making it worse. Um, like, of course, not his fault. He's not choosing to be murdered, but like that, like the people so little understand what's going on that they're like sacrificing Peter, which is then just making things way worse every single time because the beast is not getting like his meal that he wants to have at the end of Peter's life. Um, and so I think that that imagery is very interesting. And then there's also like kind of like Chilling Adventures of Sabrina vibes. Of it's just like, yep, there's a chapel. What is it used for? Murder. Um,
Yeah.
like yeah, all the bad things. And like, where does Peter hide? He hides in the chapel. Like that's like, there's a lot of
Because
like,
of course.
yeah, and yeah, I loved those. I think they were done well. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think something that stood out to me that you touched on a little bit there, Cameron, was like with essentially all of the adults being the ones in the cult. Like there was a bit of a through line with that of the adults being ignorant to what they were doing, even though they acted or thought that they knew what they were doing when it came to Peter and all of that. Which is something we see a lot with even like Christianity today is people who think like there's a lot of people who think they understand what they're doing, but it's not necessarily to, blame them or whatever. Like it's not it comes from a place of not knowing that they don't understand. Um and how that is a reflection of even just us and ourselves. Like we think we understand what's going on or what we're doing and how that is giving us the results that we want, but even that is like, do we ever fully understand God's plans? Not really. He sees the whole picture. We have the puzzle pieces, um, and yeah,
Um, I think that it is very not coincidental that both James and Peter have names of apostles. Um, Also, I got very interested in that. And um, as we are probably aware, Peter means the rock. And his character is referred to as being like a rock or a stone a few times. And I was like, oh, I see what you're doing. and James means the usurper, um, which is also interesting in that his dad wanted to send him in there to take over Peter's immortality. Um, and then how it all plays out in the end as well. Um, and I also just looked it up, and not necessarily related, but Wyatt means strong in war. Um, I did not write down any quotes, but I feel like the three of them kind of refer to each other and treat each other as like the relationship between the three of them are like is like a faith. Um, I think not necessarily in a way that they like worship each other, but just that they're like bonded and believe in each other, even in the times when they can't necessarily trust each other, but they believe in each other. Um, yeah. Um, Another big theme in the novel is home. Um, Cameron, you had mentioned earlier that this was like Wyatt's home turf, um, which I thought was very interesting because, yes, it obviously is being like her family home. And yet somehow she felt the most out of place to me there out of the three of them. Um, yeah, what is all your thoughts on home in the novel?
I think there's a very interesting like switch that we get with that of like when they are like younger kids growing up. Well, Peter's 400, but when they're like younger
No
kids
biggie.
growing up,
A young
like
400.
yeah, he looks good for 400. So, um, but like when they're like kids growing up, it's like, oh, this is like Wyatt's family's property. Like she is the golden child in that sense. But then after she leaves, she now has to come back to this home that like she doesn't know. She has to be confronted by how little she knew when she was there. And she kind of has to come back like as an adult and be like, wait, what was going on here? Like, this isn't just my like absentee father. Like, this is way worse than what I thought was going on here. And so, um, yeah, so I kind of like how we get that swap as we get like I guess early teen Wyatt, and then versus like 18-year-old Wyatt when she comes back, and then we also get the idea that while this is home for all three of them, none of them they love that they are there together, but none of them like being there. And so it's like all of these like bittersweet sweet memories of home for them. It's like, yes, they had fun, they enjoyed the games that they played, but like they also liked being elsewhere. And so
This is related to what you were just talking about, Cameron, because it's one of the few things I fully understood, but it's towards the end, obviously. Um, There's a Welsh word I learned in school, said James. Heareth. There's no direct translation for it in the English language, but it means a deep longing for a home you can never return to. None of us will ever be who we were again, said James, pulling her thoughts clean out of her head. And Willow Heath will never be to us what it was. And I think, like, directed to that, it's a very concise point of him saying, we were each other's homes. It wasn't the farm that was our home. It was our friendship that was our home. And we can't have that now because things have changed. And that's like the biggest part of this book is like Wyatt and Peter and James wanting a home they can't have because it doesn't exist anymore.
It's an Asgard is a people, not a place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think this is the theme that Joseph Campbell's presence ties into. I think him being James's father is you want him to be a home and feel like home. Um, but he is not. Um, he's the manipulation of that. Um, and yeah, that's why he is the BBEG.
Him and the spider, apparently.
Well, the spider did nothing wrong.
The spider was just existing.
The spider's actually kind of helpful.
But Joseph has come to destroy their home in like every way that he can. Are there any other themes that we didn't discuss that stood out to you?
Peter never really gave up on wanting to keep things from Wyatt. Yeah. That's something. He always wanted to keep secrets from Wyatt. And that's not so much a theme as it is just like Wyatt or Peter not having a full character arc development thing. He's always just gonna keep something from Wyatt if it kills him, which it kind of does.
I was reading Dungeons and Drama at the same time that I was reading this. And in both of these, there's a fantastic man. If these people would just talk to each other and
things
sort through
this,
fine. Things would be fine. And yeah. Is it a mystery because Peter just literally won't tell people the answer? Kind of. Like, he has his reasons, but like.
But still, at some point, you gotta realize that it's gonna all go a lot more smoothly if you tell people things.
Yeah.
And you just like, never do that.
He's like 400 years old. How much character development can you expect?
A lot!
5 days.
Especially when you're in love with an 18-year-old. I didn't sign up for a Bella and sparkly vampire.
It does establish, though, that he doesn't remember his previous lives. So at least there's that.
Yeah, well, and whose fault is that?
I mean, you're right, but like.
Alrighty. So also from Kelly Andrews AMA, someone asked, after Your Blood, My Bones, what did you see Wyatt going on to do with her life, and James too? And she says, this is probably my most asked question from the Q&A and readers in general. While I've been honored that so many people are still thinking about Wyatt, Peter, and James long after the story has ended, I've been reluctant to answer. It isn't because I don't have my own ideas, but because I don't want to sway anyone else's. The story belongs to all of you now, and what happens next is open for your personal interpretation. For those who find themselves unsatisfied by that response, I will say this. There's some suggestion of what's next for them in I Am Made of Death. But truthfully, what happens next is that the two of them get to grow up, both of them, whatever that looks like. Um, do you have any ideas on where Wyatt and James are now?
I want like a 20-year time skip, and I want like height of her power, super witchy Wyatt, just like being I want her to be the, I guess that would only make her like almost 40, so maybe like even longer, but I want old Wyatt being super kooky, and then being the one to like being like the Merlin archetype of like she's the one that like we get the Wyatt that actually knows what's going on and has learned and has researched her powers. I would love for
I'm
us to get
surprised she married James.
um, I don't know how we got here. It's almost like we trauma bonded.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to see like again like Merlin esque Wyatt of like her getting to be that the witchy leader. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, other than that, I mean, I'm excited that we'll hopefully get some references in I Am Made of Death. I'm that's something that like based on our other conversations around this book, Shanine, that the fact that like Kelly ties in all of her books together in like a shared universe, that makes me really excited because it means we can get some references, even if they are oblique, to like what's going to happen with these characters.
Cameron, your vision has me picturing Wyatt as a little old witch in a Studio Ghibli movie,
I mean,
which is like the best thing to picture ever. Like, she's just the mysterious old witch in a Studio Ghibli movie, except we actually know her backstory. And it's great. Like, that's all I want to picture now. Is she's just a Studio Ghibli character. And that's that. Like,
I mean, would I recommend that this grown-up version of the character be played by Catherine Hahn? Definitely.
yes. So that's my where is she now? She's officially a Studio Ghibli character.
I can see it. A little mushroom witch.
Yep.
Um, yeah. I don't think James and Wyatt are married, but I do think they are besties and absolutely insufferable to everyone that ever has to be around them at the same time. Um, I don't I don't think that James ended up getting Peter's immortality. I think he's just going to be able to live his own life. All right. Is there anything else that stood out to you or any quotes that you would like to share?
I do have one. There's a couple times that I could have brought this quote up during the conversation, but like I didn't want to like necessarily hop in. But this is it's a cool like summary of the three characters. It says the quote is they sprouted up much the way trees did, first alongside one another and then twined all together, their branches entangled. Um, I really liked that visual. That's like it's by no means. We talked about this with V.E. Schwab because I think Schwab does this amazingly as well. But the idea of these like short and sweet descriptives that like are just filled with so much imagery, and I really liked that. It's so good, and it feels so poignant for like kind of where they've now found themselves as young adults and having to sort out what's what from their past. And so, yeah, I really liked that one.
Don't really have anything additional.
All right. I will share Wyatt's Aunt Violet's prophecy. She says, "You can't run from the things you fear. Instead, invite them to your table, sit with them a while, Look them in the eye. You will find they are not as big as they seem, and you are not as small as you think.
Mm-hmm. Which is a good life quote. Like,
A very good life quote.
yeah.
All right. What are your final thoughts on Your Blood, My Bones?
I probably would not have made it to the end of part one if I had picked this up for book club because I wasn't given much motivation to continue being confused. But if you're okay with being confused and never really getting any proper answers, go for it.
I'm I'm curious to go and read Kelly's other works. I'm interested in The Whispering Dark. Part of that is Shanine knowing how highly you've spoken about it. The other part being like you really set this up for this was going to be like maximum spooks, and so like I went in like kind of worried because you were talking about like convincing me to do a scary book not in October, and so like I was ready to be like super scared, but like if which honestly thank you because you probably set me up for success there of like just like anticipating it to be super bad bad in a scary way and it wasn't, so like okay cool I'm interested in reading more of this. I haven't checked the library app to see if they have The Whispering Dark yet, but like I'm very interested in checking it out and seeing I Am Made of Death once that comes out. um, Again, I'm a sucker for interconnected stories. Wow, the MCU fan, like, shocked. Um, and so I really like the idea of getting to build up characters and then have them become side characters in other people's stories. And so, uh, yeah. So based on what we've read so far, I'm definitely very interested in doing that. I might go audiobook this one as well after I do The Whispering Dark, and just try to get like um, the points that did confuse me was that me reading this like on a cruise ship slash on a plane, or was that just things that actually confused me? And so,
Um, I loved Your Blood, My Bones. I have been following Kelly Andrew on social media since before she had an agent, and it has been so exciting getting to watch her writer journey and get to read these characters that she talks about online. Um, I loved The Whispering Dark. I was so excited to get to read more by her. Um, I love just the cottagecore horror vibes of Your Blood, My Bones. I love the complicated relationships between the three main characters. And Kelly made me cry, which, as you probably all know by now, is the highest praise that I give to books. So um, I love it. If you like dark stories with creepy vibes, um, I think you'll like it. All right. Um, so since this is technically April's book club that we are doing at the beginning of May, we are doing a shorter reading material for our May book club, um, in honor of X-Men 97. We will be reading X-Men Life Death, which is a story arc including Uncanny X-Men 186, 198, 205, 214, and material from 53, written by Chris Claremont and art by Barry Windsor Smith. Um, yeah, should be fun.
Yep. I don't want to say too much because spoilers for X-Men 97, but like this is a storyline that is featured in there. It's supposed to be one of the most it's supposed to be like one of the an extremely well regarded set of stories focusing on the character of Storm, and so I'm very excited for that, especially because the last time I was like, hey, it'd be a cool idea for us to do a comic tie-in, that was Shang-Chi, and it was some of the worst comics I have ever read. So this is well regarded, and so I'm very excited for us to read this. Yeah. And then Janine, you had called this out. There is a hardcover or like an actual collection you can get, or you can find them on Marvel Unlimited using the numbers, and we'll make sure that's all posted in the Discord so that people can find those as well. But time for another month of Marvel Unlimited. So.
Except I'm gonna be the person who gets the hardback, despite the price, because I want to grow my collection. And this has good reviews, and I like hard copy things. I'm a little collector goblin. I collect things.
All right. So yes, that will be at the end of May on a date TBD.
Probably the 30th, but
announced in the Discord.
Yeah.
Probably. All right. Thank you all for joining us for our First Geek 411 book club. We are First Geek 411 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Come join our Discord server or send us an email at 1stgeek411@gmail.com. Check out our Redbubble store, watch live on our Twitch, and find all our videos over on YouTube. I'm the Hoot. What am I? Hoot and Howl Tales, TALES, on Instagram and Threads.
Your name is Shanine. You live in Canada. It is the year 2024. I think Trudeau is still running your country.
In theory.
I know Biden's my country leader.
My name's Cameron. You can find me around the internet as Humar Whittle.
I'm Emma Reisenauer. You can find me at I am not prepared with an I in the prepared on all the interwebs.
Read a book.
Keep your blood inside of your body. Just as a general statement.
Drink some water while you do that. You know, drink some water. I don't know what's happening.
And break. Okay, post show chat. I'm gonna slide away real quick.
How dare. I'm throwing my notes away.